we need to talk about dungeons. No, not those dungeons, fractal dungeons. 5-player content is some of the most important content in all MMOs, and Guild Wars 2 is no exception. However, there has been a bit of an elephant in the room for the past few dungeons that ArenaNet has released. Fractal dungeons are becoming more and more centered around a single, longer encounter with minimal trash, minigame, or movement events in between. And whilst change is not inherently bad, it is a dramatic shift away, not only from how older Fractal dungeons are, it's also a shift away from what the Fractal community actually enjoys playing. I think that it's important to note that I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with what is essentially a 5-player mini-raid boss. I don't particularly like the previous 2 releases, Silent Surf and The Lonely Tower, but I think that it's not super important for the purpose of this discussion. The issue is that even if the bosses were good, they would still be, in my opinion, very bad fractals. Potentially good strike missions, but bad fractals. And I think that really is the crux of it all. I'll fully dive into what I think is wrong with fractals right now, but just to get the main point across, I'll give the too long didn't watch right here. I am concerned about the design vision at ArenaNet regarding 5-player dungeon-style content. I'm not confident that they are totally sure where they want to go with them, and I haven't seen a cohesive vision for a very long time now. I think it's essential that ArenaNet address this. I found the absence of commentary on The Lonely Tower, or instance content in general, in the Secrets of the Obscure post-mortem very unfortunate, and also the choice to release the challenge mode on the same day as the Janthir Wild announcement, very telling. I really want to see a transparent blog post or stream or interview or whatever about how ArenaNet view the design vision for fractals and what they want them to be, because right now I don't think it's working, which is a shame because fractals and their challenge modes have been very comfortably some of the best content in the game's history. Most notably is, I think, the classic Nightmare Fractal and Shattered Observatory, with an honorable mention to Sunqua Peak, which may not be the best fractal ever made thanks to some wonderful unskippable dialogue in it. It is one of the best fractal bosses, especially on challenge mode with a whole extra phase. Now that I've basically got the important discussion part over with, you can leave and go and write a comment telling me how much you actually love the Lonely Tower fractal. However, if you want to listen to me rant about why these fractals aren't good for a few minutes, then you're in luck. I'm just about to do that. Alright, so let's just go for it. Having fractals where 75% of the time is spent on a single boss doing a fairly limited amount of attacks for 4 minutes is not fun at all. I'm not going to get into specific mechanics because we'll be here all day. The point is, I think dungeon-style fights should be fast-paced, mechanics light, and highly oriented around dodging attacks and individual play while maintaining damage and movement, rather than handling mechanics constantly. I think a perfect example of this is the Nightmare Fractal. Each individual boss really doesn't actually have that many attacks or mechanics, and the attacks they do have are not complex at all. They also have multiple phases, which break up the longer encounters and have clear burst windows. It is worth noting that power creep has made burst windows a little overcooked in Fractals, but I do think they are a very important part of PvE content, not just in Fractals, by the way. I think that the lack of burst windows and decision-making when it comes to rotation and ability usage is something that is commonly missing from Guild Wars 2 encounter design in general, but that's another story. Phases are an incredibly important thing here, and let's talk about why. You can have longer encounters that are fun. A great comparison is Eparch in the open world and Suwon in the open world. Suwon is quite often a longer encounter than Eparch, but it is high energy the entire time, thanks to how many phases there are, and also additional mechanics that pop up, like later on, like the tail and the swaps, that makes the fight feel a lot more dynamic. Eparch, on the other hand, is the same from 100 to 0, making the fight feel like it's dragging on much longer, despite taking about the same time, if not less. The same is extremely true in instance boss design. Eparch and Kanaxai are pain, because they don't change super significantly at all between phases. The obvious comparison would be Eye Keeper of the Peak from Sunqua Peak, where not only does the boss possess 3 elemental phases, each with their own intermission, there is also an additional and very different dark phase on challenge mode. That is what it takes to make a longer encounter entertaining. I think Eye also does the combat design quite well too. Very dodge and positioning heavy, low amounts of mechanics going off, and burst windows that the player even has a degree of control over. Definitely a solid boss fractal in my eye. If ArenaNet want to go down the single boss style, then bosses need to look more like Eye and a lot less like Eparch. However, I don't think single boss dungeons are actually good at all, especially when that boss makes up the bulk of the time of the dungeon. I personally have an affinity for the movement and speed-oriented multi-encounter style, as I think that plays in really well to how Guild Wars 2's combat system works. And I've become much more emboldened feeling this way after playing Mythic Plus in World of Warcraft, which is essentially WoW's juiced-up version of Fractals. Every dungeon in that game is quite similar to Nightmare Fractal in many ways, albeit significantly longer, less linear, and with more of a focus on efficient pathing and movement through trash packs. The similarities are especially prominent when it comes to how the bosses play out. Except for very high tyrannical keys, and, well, yeah, that really is a story for another time, bosses are fast-paced, simple, even more so than Nightmare Fractal, in fact, usually having a couple of core abilities and mechanics that you have to understand, and stuff to not stand in or get hit by. And as a result of this, the Mythic Plus dungeon experience is, in my opinion, very close to what the optimal MMO dungeon experience is. Blasting down solid, simple bosses, and then figuring out how to get through the dungeon without dying as fast as possible. The movement and handling trash or minigames is a really important part of the experience, in my opinion, and if you're doubting that, then I'd point you towards stuff like blasting down the crate all at the same time in the Nightmare Fractal, or crushing the Sunspear Horde at the end of Twilight Oasis, and really wacky stuff like the Swampland jumping puzzle, or splitting up to do all of Thormanova Reactor at the same time, or just the entirety of the uncategorized Fractal. That stuff's fun. I don't want to play a 5-player strike mission. If I wanted to do that, I'd go and do a strike mission. Guild Wars 2 needs dungeons. Right now, I'm not sure that we're getting any. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about what's going on with fractals in the comments. I'd really like to get some discussion going on this topic because I think it is one of the most important issues facing the game right now. So share the video all over the place so we can hear everyone's reasonable and well thought out opinions. And of course, if you liked the video, then like it, subscribe for more content, and support the channel by joining or wandering over to Patreon, where you can even get insane early access to what I'm working on next. More content to come. I'll see you next time.